Have you ever felt it? That quiet, creeping sense of disconnection. The Sunday evening dread that settles in your gut as the weekend winds down. You have a job, maybe even a good one by all conventional metrics. The pay is decent. The title is respectable. The work is fine. But something is missing. There's a hollow space where a fire used to be. You go through the motions, you hit your targets, you collect your paycheck, but the spark, the intrinsic joy of creating, of solving, of building something that matters, feels like a distant memory. Or maybe you see it in your children. You remember a time when they were endlessly curious, dismantling toys to see how they worked, asking a torrent of why questions, driven by an insatiable, internal engine of discovery. And now, that engine seems to be sputtering, replaced by a focus on grades, on gold stars, on getting the A, not for the love of learning, but for the reward it brings. Why does this happen? Why does the passion we have for our work, for our hobbies, for our learning, so often fade into a dull obligation? This isn't just a personal failing. It's a near-universal human experience in the modern world. We are living in a profound state of disengagement, and we've been told for a century that the solution is simple. Offer a better reward, a bigger bonus, a higher grade, a shinier trophy. And yet, the disconnection persists, and in many cases, it gets worse. This very puzzle, this massive, gaping chasm between what we believe motivates us and what actually does, is what captured the mind of a man named Daniel Pink, a former lawyer and political speechwriter. Pink found himself looking at the landscape of modern business and society and saw a fundamental flaw in its architecture. He saw a world built on an outdated and deeply flawed understanding of human behavior. He became obsessed with digging into the science, the stories, and the studies to find an answer, not just for himself, but for all of us. This is a story of his journey to uncover a truth so simple yet so radical that it has the power to reshape how we work, how we manage, how we learn, and ultimately, how we live. To understand a breakthrough, you first have to understand the world that came before it. You have to immerse yourself in the operating system that still, to this day, runs silently in the background of most of our organizations and schools. Pink calls the system Motivation 2.0, and its logic is built on a very specific and now very outdated view of humanity. Imagine the dawn of the 20th century. The world is being reshaped by the raw power of the Industrial Revolution. The nature of work is changing from the farm and the artisan's workshop to the colossal, deafening factory floor. The most pressing question for industrialists of the era was one of efficiency. How do you get thousands of human beings, each with their own whims and desires, to perform simple, repetitive, algorithmic tasks with the precision of a machine? The answer came from a man named Frederick Winslow Taylor, the father of what he calls scientific management. Taylor's view was that workers were essentially parts of a complex machine. They were not there to think, to create, or to find meaning. They were there to execute. To get more out of them, you didn't need to inspire them. You simply needed to reward the behavior you wanted and punish the behavior you didn't. This was the birth of the carrot and the stick as a formal management philosophy. If a worker loaded more pig iron onto a rail car, he got a bonus. If he was slow, his pay was docked or he was fired. It was simple, it was logical, and for the kind of work being done, it was brutally effective. This model, this external, if-then system of rewards, became the bedrock of 20th century management. It was codified in business schools, preached by consultants, and built into the very structure of our corporations. The annual performance review, the sales commission, the bonus structure, all of these are direct descendants of Taylor's factory floor thinking. For 100 years, this was the unquestioned gospel of motivation. It assumed that human beings are fundamentally inert creatures who must be prodded into action, and that the best prods are external ones, money, praise, and fear. The problem is, while this system was being perfected and rolled out across the globe, the world changed under our feet. The work itself evolved. The routine, algorithmic tasks of the assembly line began to be automated, outsourced, or done by computers. The work that was left, the work that increasingly defines the 21st century economy, is different. It's heuristic work. It requires creativity, critical thinking, and complex problem solving. It's the work of a software engineer debugging 1 million lines of code, a doctor diagnosing a rare disease, a marketer creating a new campaign. You cannot write a simple script for this kind of work. And this is where the crisis began. Managers, still using the old Motivation 2.0 playbook, found themselves in a state of bewilderment. They were dangling bigger and bigger carrots, but their teams weren't getting more creative or more engaged. In fact, the opposite was happening. They were witnessing a rise in burnout, a decrease in innovation, and a pervasive sense of compliance over commitment. They were trying to run today's complex, creative software on an operating system designed a century ago for a steam-powered world. The system wasn't just failing. It was actively causing harm. The carrots and sticks, once the solution, had become the problem itself. It was this fundamental mismatch that sparked Pink's quest to find what he would eventually call Motivation 3.0, an upgraded system based not on what business leaders assumed about us, but on what decades of science had actually proven. The first major crack in the old foundation of motivation came not from a business guru, but from a pair of psychologists, Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, who in the 1970s conducted a series of elegant and startling experiments. One of the most famous involved a puzzle called the Soma Cube. They brought in two groups of university students and had them solve these puzzles. In the first session, both groups were just left to their own devices. As you'd expect, many found the puzzles inherently interesting and would continue to play with them even during their free breaks. But then, in the second session, the researchers began to pay one of the groups for each puzzle they successfully completed. The other group was paid nothing. Unsurprisingly, the paid group worked hard and solved more puzzles. The carrot was working. But then came the crucial third session. The researchers told both groups that the experiment was over, the money was gone, and they were just waiting for the final paperwork. They then left the students alone in the room with the puzzles. What happened next would change our understanding of motivation forever. The group that had never been paid continued to play with the puzzles at roughly the same rate as they had before, driven by their own curiosity. But the group that had been paid, their interest plummeted. Once the external reward was removed, their internal desire to solve the puzzles vanished. The reward hadn't just encouraged the behavior. It had extinguished the intrinsic motivation that was already there. Deci and Ryan had discovered profound truth. Human beings have an innate biological drive to be autonomous, to be the authors of their own lives. When an external if-then reward is introduced for an interesting task, it turns play into work. It hijacks our sense of control, and in doing so, it smothers the very flame of curiosity it's intended to stoke. The scientific principle found its most vivid real-world expression in a place you might not expect. A burgeoning software company in Australia called Atlassian. Its founders, wrestling with how to foster genuine innovation, decided to try a radical experiment. They called it FedEx Day. For a single 24-hour period, they told their developers they were free to work on anything they wanted, with anyone they wanted, in any way they wanted. The only condition was that at the end of the 24 hours, they had to show their results to the rest of the company. It was a day of pure, unadulterated autonomy. The results were staggering. In just one day, this period of sanctioned freedom generated a whole host of new product ideas, elegant software fixes, and improvements to internal systems that had been languishing on official to-do lists for months. This single day of self-directed work proved more productive and more innovative than weeks of top-down, managed labor. Atlassian eventually turned this into a formal program called Ship It Days, a core part of their culture that has been credited with some of their most successful products. Pink realized this wasn't just a quirky perk. It was the first pillar of a new motivational operating system. Autonomy isn't about chaos or a lack of accountability. It is about providing people with freedom over the four key dimensions of their work: their task, their time, their technique, and their team. It's the freedom to choose what you work on, like Google's famous 20% time, which gave birth to Gmail and AdSense. It's the freedom to choose when you work, embodied by companies that have adopted a results-only work environment, where all that matters is the work itself, not whether you are at your desk from 9 to 5. It's the freedom over how you do the work, trusting professionals to use their expertise rather than forcing them to follow a rigid script. And it's the freedom to choose who you work with, allowing for the organic formation of high-performing teams. This wasn't a call for anarchy. It was a call to treat human beings as adults, to trust them, and to give them the room to direct their own path toward a common goal. It was the first critical piece of the puzzle, a direct answer to the disengagement so many feel. We feel disconnected because the old system has systematically stripped away our sense of control. The first step toward a better way was to give it back. But as Pink dug deeper, a new complication emerged. Autonomy, while powerful, wasn't the entire story. Giving someone complete freedom is one thing, but what if they feel like they're just spinning their wheels? What if they have the freedom to work on a task, but no sense that they're getting any better at it? A feeling of aimless, stagnant freedom can be just as demotivating as rigid control. This led to the discovery of the second great pillar of intrinsic motivation, the deep, universal, and often overlooked human desire for mastery. Mastery is our innate urge to get better and better at something that matters. It's the reason a guitarist will spend thousands of hours practicing scales in their bedroom, not for an audience or a paycheck, but for the sheer, private satisfaction of nailing a difficult passage. It's the reason amateur astronomers spend freezing nights staring at the sky, and why millions of people contribute their time and expertise for free to open-source projects like Linux or Wikipedia. This kind of behavior is a complete anomaly for the carrot-and-stick world of Motivation 2.0. There is no if-then reward here. The reward is the activity itself. The reward is the progress. Pink found the perfect scientific framework for this in the work of the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and his concept of flow. Flow is that almost magical state of deep absorption where you're so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. Time seems to disappear, your sense of self dissolves, and you are fully present in the moment. Csikszentmihalyi discovered that this optimal state doesn't happen when we're passive and relaxed. It happens when we are stretched to our limits, voluntarily, in pursuit of a difficult but achievable goal. It's a sweet spot where the challenge of a task is perfectly calibrated to our level of skill. If the task is too easy, we become bored. If it's too difficult, we become anxious. But in that narrow channel of flow, we are both fully engaged and deeply satisfied. This is the psychological engine of mastery. The joy isn't in achieving the final goal, but in the process of striving, of pushing ourselves, of feeling our skills grow. This insight reveals why so many workplaces are profoundly demotivating. They're often designed to be boredom-proof or anxiety-proof, giving people tasks that are either too menial or too overwhelming, rarely providing that perfect channel for flow. They rob people of the opportunity to struggle, to learn, and to grow. Pink realized that fostering mastery requires a radical shift in our approach. It means understanding that mastery is a mindset, as Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck discovered. People with a growth mindset, who believe their abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, are far more likely to embrace challenges and persist through setbacks than those with a fixed mindset, who believe their talents are innate gifts. Fostering mastery means encouraging the belief that everyone can improve. It also means accepting that mastery is a pain. It requires effort, grit, and deliberate practice. True engagement comes from confronting challenges, not avoiding them. Finally, and perhaps most beautifully, mastery is an asymptote. An asymptote is a straight line that a curve approaches but never, ever touches. You can pursue mastery your entire life, whether in coding or carpentry or parenting, but you can never fully achieve it. There's always more to learn, another level to reach. And it is this infinite horizon that makes the pursuit so endlessly compelling. Autonomy without mastery is directionless. Mastery without autonomy is frustrating. But together, they form a powerful combination. They explain why the developer at Atlassian felt so energized. She had the autonomy to choose her project and the opportunity to apply and stretch her skills in a state of flow, pursuing mastery over her craft. These two forces were the engine of a new kind of motivation, but there was still one missing piece. The steering wheel, the compass that gives a journey its meaning. The grand synthesis, the moment all the pieces clicked into place, came with the revelation of the third and final element, purpose. We now had autonomy, the power to direct our own journey. We had mastery, the engine of progress that drives us along the path. But to what end? Why are we on this journey in the first place? Purpose is the why. It's the connective tissue that links our individual efforts to something larger and more enduring than ourselves. It is the understanding that our work, Our daily tasks, our struggles, and our triumphs are in service of a cause we believe in. Autonomy and mastery are the essential components of individual motivation, but purpose is what elevates them, transforming a job into a calling and a group of individuals into a unified team. Pink realized that for generations, we have assumed that purpose was a luxury, a soft concept separate from the hard-nosed realities of business. Profit was the only purpose that mattered. But a new wave of organizations and a wealth of research were proving that assumption catastrophically wrong. The purpose motive is emerging as an equally powerful, if not more powerful, driver of human action than the profit motive. Consider the stark contrast between the business models of two encyclopedias at the turn of the millennium. On one side, you had Microsoft's Encarta. It was backed by the world's largest software company, paid professional writers and editors, and managed with top-down precision. On the other, you had Wikipedia. It was created by a ragtag army of volunteers, paid nothing, and managed by a loose, self-organizing community. By every metric of Motivation 2.0, Encarta should have dominated. It had all the resources and all the external incentives. And yet Wikipedia, driven by a community united by a shared purpose to create and share some of all human knowledge for free, utterly vanquished its corporate rival. The participants weren't motivated by a paycheck. They were motivated by the chance to be part of something meaningful. This is a unifying moment of the entire book. The secret to high performance and deep satisfaction isn't just about giving people freedom and challenges. It's about contextualizing that freedom and those challenges within a mission that matters. This is the great unifying idea of Motivation 3.0, a new, upgraded operating system built on a tripod of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. When these three elements are present, they create a virtuous cycle. A strong sense of purpose fuels a desire to achieve mastery. The pursuit of mastery demands autonomy to experiment and learn. And the freedom of autonomy allows people to connect with their work's purpose on a deeper, more personal level. This fundamentally changes how we must view the problem we started with. That feeling of disconnection, of disengagement, is not just a lack of money or a need for more freedom. It is a crisis of purpose. The ultimate payoff isn't just a more productive workforce. It's a more fulfilled one. It's the difference between a stonemason who says, "I'm cutting a rock," and one who says, "I'm building a cathedral." The task is the same, but the purpose transforms everything. So where does this journey of discovery leave us? We've traveled from the noisy factory floors of the early 20th century to the quiet, focused labs of modern psychology. We've seen how the old world of carrots and sticks, the system of Motivation 2.0, is not just failing but actively undermining our performance and our spirit in the creative economy of today. And we've uncovered the blueprint for a new system, an upgrade built for how human beings actually thrive. This new operating system, Motivation 3.0, is not a complex management theory. It's a simple, elegant, and profoundly human framework based on our three innate psychological needs: autonomy, the desire to direct our own lives; mastery, the urge to get better at stuff that matters; and purpose, the yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves. The blueprint, then, is to look at your own life, your team, your organization, or your family through this lens. Ask the hard questions. Where are we systematically denying people a sense of autonomy? How can we create an environment that fosters mastery, that encourages a growth mindset and embraces challenges? And most importantly, how do we connect the daily, often mundane tasks to a transcendent purpose? How do we stop talking only about what we do and start talking about why we do it? That feeling of disengagement we spoke of at the beginning is not your fault. It's not a personal failure. It is a systems failure. It is the ghost of an old machine, a remnant of a bygone era, rattling around in our modern lives. But knowing this is one thing, acting on it is another. Understanding is the first step. But the real change happens when you begin the work of upgrading your own world. It starts with conversation, with a small experiment, with the decision to trade a little bit of control for a little bit of trust. If this story has resonated with you, if you recognize the disconnect in your own life and feel the pull of a more human-centered way of living and working, then I invite you to join this conversation. Subscribe and become part of a community dedicated not just to consuming ideas, but to applying them, to building a world where our work and our lives are driven by what truly matters. Because the secret to high performance isn't a bigger paycheck. It's the deeply human need to direct our own lives, to extend our own abilities, and to live a life of purpose.